Josiah and Krishan. I'm your host, and these are our two lovely co-hosts. And this is our pilot for our podcast, with the mission being to really take a deep dive into the sermons. This one in particular being Honor Thy Father and Mother from Frank Blue.
Frank the Tank.
So,
Franklin.
to kick us off, just trying to get right into the meat of it. For you guys, what part of the teaching did you wrestle with the most?
When you say wrestle with, is it something that like stuck out to us, or are you saying like, this is kind of a harder thing for me to process, like this is something that I got to process a bit?
Maybe not process, something that felt a little bit prickly, convicting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I could probably answer this a few different ways. I have an answer for you that is not necessarily prickly, but maybe something that like shed a light on something that I hadn't considered before, if that makes sense.
Do you take the deal?
Yeah, do you take the deal? Okay. I would say that, when Frank came from the perspective and shed a light on, honor thy father and mother is something that, brings value and uplifts women, like specifically from the Old Testament scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that was something that like really connected with me and resonated with me. Because it's true, right? Like when we look at old culture, especially, back then, what we considered to be culture in like the Old Testament, just times, we'll say it all the time. Well, back then, like women, weren't valued. Like women had to stay here and do that, and if they didn't, then they had no value. It's just and this idea of honoring your father and doing things for your father in that time, like from a sense of what it was back then, right? Like BC times, even what we have today, it's this equal level playing field of like, we're not just honoring your father and then your mother, honor your father and your mother. I think that, a lot of times the Bible gets from, whether you want to say misguided, whether you want to say like it's a fallacy, or however, is just, the Bible like tears down women. The Bible doesn't portray women in a great light, or it doesn't uplift women, or it's sexist, misogynistic, whatever the terminology is. I think when we look at this and we, take it in the context of what's being said and the timeline that it's being said, right? Like, the Ten Commandments, and all the laws afterwards were pretty much like, hey, Israel, this is how you're gonna identify, like, you will be identified with your God in this way.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people say that the Bible is sexist because it was written in a patriarchal time, which it was, technically. But if your argument is that it's anti-women because it's written in a patriarchal time period, then look at what everybody else was doing in that period and then compare it to what Israel did. Because if the basis of your argument is that it was in a patriarchal timeline, it's like, okay, what did that mean? How were they patriarchal? Were they patriarchal in the sense that women were second class, women were even people, or whatever? And then when you answer that question, then you answer, okay, did everybody around them, including Israel, do that? Or were there particular things that Israel did, or that God told the Israelites that were not inherently patriarchal, right? Like, honor your father and your mother. Or even like a lot of the Levitical laws about, how, divorce, remarriage, and like, different slave laws and different things like that, which is a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But I think that with our biases, it's easy for us to make accusations that we don't know how to back up, except that it just sounds good. Yeah,
I feel like it's something that adds to this element of equalness within, like, men and women roles within that we find within scripture, and this idea that like the Lord created us different but equal. So it just really, like, I think to me, like, really resonated with me in the sense of like, God from the get-go, like had a plan, had a vision, and this is one of the commandments that he used to really identify the equalness that, like, we have separate roles but we're 100% equal. So
Yeah, I appreciate those perspectives. I think it's really fascinating to look at the Bible amongst other cultures at the time, and what this distinction is making, right? In a lot of pagan cultures, it's like, well, the man, the heir, like, he's the important one, and then, the daughter or whatever, because, there's physical strength, there's authority there, and even from pretty young ages, he can overpower his mother. But, right, to stand against the cultures of this world and the pagan ideologies, God says, hey, it doesn't matter that you're stronger. It doesn't matter that you're the heir and you're carrying on the family lineage. You are still to honor this woman just as you are your father. It is not about an intrinsic power, but an appeal to a higher system of honor and esteem.
Yeah.
I really love that. Was there anything about the teaching that you felt was really like, man, like that's hard to take in? Maybe about forgiveness or overlooking the mistakes of parents?
Talk about it, pastor's kid.
I mean, I was about to say, because we were talking about it just the other day, but I feel that, I mean, it wasn't as much as it was inherently prickly, but I think the longer that I held it, the more tingly my fingers felt, if that makes sense, you know? Because with forgiveness, I think, you know, as raised in a Christian home, forgiveness is an inherent part of your lifestyle. So you're like, you know, someone wrongs you, you forgive them, or if you wrong, then you forgive. But I didn't exactly know how to apply that to my parents, because to me, my parents were this like, you know, because to me, honor mom and dad meant, you know, respect them, which is true. But the way I did that was like, okay, mom and dad could do no wrong, and I believe that. And so when they did do wrong, I like stuffed that down because I was like, okay, well, I'm hurt or upset, but I'm the one in the wrong for sure. So like I have no right to be upset about it. And so when mom or dad would come to apologize to us, like the example dad gave in said teaching, it kind of broke that for me. I was like, wait a minute, why are you apologizing to me? Like he would say, I'm sorry, do you forgive me? And I'd be like confused. I'm like, yeah, I guess. I didn't even know that
You can do that.
I could do that. Yeah. I didn't even know that I could even have this opportunity to forgive.
Yeah, he would even need to ask for forgiveness.
Exactly. So, but what happened was an unexpected consequence of thinking like that is that I had like buried like issues. I wouldn't call it resentment, because I think that's too strong of a word. But there are some issues that would kind of like make me turn away and just kind of like, you know, like you know, I don't want to approach my parents about certain things because either I'm unintentionally holding on to something that they did back then that hurt me, and you know, my response was to not think about it, and so I just curved around. And so for me, forgiveness starts with recognizing that your parents are not God, right?
Yeah.
And recognizing that your parents are flawed. And once you recognize their imperfections, maybe let it hurt if it needs to, and then take the time to forgive. And so, and I think that's how, like, I think that's when my hands started tingling a little bit, when I was kind of holding on to that idea of forgiveness, especially becoming an adult. Because
I think, I don't know if I would say like listening to it when I heard it on this past Sunday was probably prickly. I think the idea of it was prickly when I first became a Christian. And this idea of like honor your father and mother, and if you're not raised in a Christian household, that's almost like problematic, right? Like, what do we say to like, hey, yes, your dad is an alcoholic, honor him. Yes, your mom, you know, whatever issues are, your mom doesn't pay attention to you. Like whatever it is with your parent. I don't want to get into, you know, I guess stereotypes between problematic parents, but whatever it is like with your parent, you should honor them, and it becomes a real hard issue that I think, you know, a newer Christian or someone that has even been a Christian for a while, but, you know, doesn't have to, I guess, deal with their parents or interact with their parents too much. It's not really front and center. I think I say that because, you know, I definitely struggled with it a lot. I think my dad and I have a complicated relationship. Like, it's definitely complicated, you know, it's not problematic. Like, I can call him right now and, you know, if I needed to speak with him about something at length, I could. But, you know, honoring him, you know, I've had to like teeter this line of, you know, being like just full blown, just attacking him with scripture and saying you should live life like this. And like the honoring thing to do, I think, is, you know, live a life that he can see, you know, the decisions that I'm making, and, you know, living in light of scripture is a way that I've come to honor him. But I definitely think it could be prickly for people that have dealt with abuse, people that I've dealt with, you know, absentee parents, and Yeah, and I think even, my wife spoke about it like when we were getting married. Like initially her parents were kind of blindsided, like with how, I guess, in their eyes, how fast our relationship
Yeah, she
had
was telling me about
progressed,
that,
you know? Yeah. And they were kind of like, hey, like, why are you doing this? We don't think you should do this. You should like postpone the wedding for a later date. And, we were on the same page of like, hey, the way for our relationship to grow is,
Get married now?
get engaged and then we get married.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we were ready for that. And, she struggled. Like, this was the first time for her that her parents were like so against something. And like, she was, when probably, for an example, I don't know if this is true or not, but when she was like, hey, I'm going to do this major in college, and like, hey, I think you'd probably be better served doing this major. She probably took their wisdom and was just like, okay, well, like, I'll
Sure.
do that. And so it's a bit harder, especially when you're a Christian. Like, to what point do we honor our parents? Like, to what extent, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when you think about it through the lens of the New Testament, right, God's putting out the Ten Commandments and setting this moral standard, it makes sense, right? Stand out from other cultures, honor your father and mother. But I think it kind of does raise a question of like, hey, if we're in the New Testament and the New Testament already commands us to love one another, like how are my parents any different? How is honoring my parents any different than just like, hey, loving one another?
That's a good question. I guess that depends on what is a biblical definition of honor then, as opposed to love. Honor means that you are respecting, in my head, you're respecting the position that somebody has. Because honor and respect are different. I think respect is something that is earned, and honor is something that is given. I think, or it can still be a choice, right? I think, like living a life honorably, or whatever. But I think if somebody says I respect them, that means that you think, oh wow, they've done something to earn this respect.
Yeah.
And honor is something that for oneself is to strive for, but to honor someone else is to inherently give. I think, like, I don't know, maybe that's my like half Chinese brain working, but you're thinking of like, even if your parents, maybe say something wrong or hurt you or something like that, you don't therefore get snippy with them and disrespect them because that's not honorable.
Yeah.
Whether or not they've won your respect, the honor is something that you give it regardless. Because what Dad was saying in the teaching as well, right? He was saying, like something along the lines of it's the kid's responsibility to honor, but parents win their hearts and earn their respect. And the way that I see that playing out in my family was, I think Talia, my oldest sister,
Eldest sister.
yeah, but like she's younger than me because people think that she's older than I am. Everybody, they're like, oh, Talia's older, right? I'm like, no, it's not. I just have a youthful exuberance about me that makes people think that she's older. But
A youthful exuberance. That's
write that down.
wow.
Anyway,
Add that to the vocabulary book.
that's my Scrabble word for the day. So Talia is kind of like the headstrong type, right? The kind of, the trailblazer, the captain of her own ship, and if somebody tries to take the wheel, she'll throw them off the ship type of deal, right? And so she was, she's a fireball, and she was, a very, free spirit as a kid, and so she would, she was the envelope pusher that mom and dad had to figure out, okay, how do we, like, rein her in the disciplinary, like, this is sinful and this is wrong way, while also, not kill her fire, right? And so I think, whether they thought about it back then or not, I think that's what was a tough tension for them. And so part of that was winning their hearts and winning her heart. And so I think part of that was being competent while also, showing grace and showing that we have made mistakes. Do you forgive us, right? And whatever it is, I'm not really one to speak about how they did that because I'm just speaking from a third person perspective, sort of. But Talia grew to respect and honor mom and dad because, again, honors their position, but respected mom and dad as people. And from that, Talia honored a lot of what mom and dad have built into her, like don't date in high school. It's not smart. Yeah. You got like, you're hitting puberty. Your brain's not working like Your brain's not working right. That's probably not a good way to say it. But it's just not super smart. Until he's like, yeah, okay. I think it's dumb. People date in high school anyway. And so I think in America, honor and respect are the same because there is no position anymore. Or if there is, it's slowly losing this inherent honor that it has, right? Honor the president, unless he's Donald Trump, right? Or unless he's Joe Biden, right? It's like, okay, I'll honor them if he's like a good leader. But
it becomes conditional in a way that the Bible does not make it conditional.
Correct. And I think that's why honor is hard to grasp now. Because honor in a lot of other places, or back then, was inherent to a lot of people, despite if you agreed or disagreed with them. But the prickly side of like the freedoms that America gives is that there is no longer any true honor.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes it difficult.
It is pushing me towards this idea of loving is what you do, like face to face. It's the action, it's the verb, right? And then like honor is, I guess, the intentionality, if you will. Like what I'm thinking about is like I love a lot of people and I will showcase love to a lot of different people. But what I do, like when I'm not with someone or what I'm not, with my mom, thinking about like, a way to honor my mom is to be intentional about calling her or whatnot. And like that, you can say that's an act of love, but I could be very much like obeying the commandment of loving my mom. But like whenever we do have a conversation, like I'm intentional and whatnot. But like I think honor is just a bit step above in this sense when it comes to our parents. So
yeah, actually, something clicked in my head just now. I think that in addition to that, like the practicalities, I think we can calling your parents or doing all those things. But I think honoring your parents means to respect their God-given like positions. And so in order to honor your parents well, you have to, of course, first honor and fear the Lord, because if you fear the Lord, then you therefore fear and respect and honor all the positions that He has put in place or how things have worked, right? And so to the fear of the Lord means that, I'm not going to have sex before marriage. And fearing the Lord means that I will not use His name in vain because His name is sacred. And that's, honorable. And also, God says to honor my parents. Parenthood is a position that God has given, to be fruitful and multiply, and to also make little disciples, right? And so I think even, so maybe this isn't helpful for the practicalities of it, but I think the best way to honor your parents is to first have the fear of the Lord, and then kind of understand how God values parenthood, I think. And so
you need to understand the higher esteem that God is calling you to before you can really understand, right? Instead of just blindly obeying, it's like, hey, God has called me to something and I will obey Him first, and that's why we do what we do. I do think there is also a level of honor of you think about the honored guests at a party, they have the nice placemat, the nice chair, right? They feel special. I think kind of having that as an undergirding principle of how you honor your parents, right? Your mom never asks you to call her, but she feels special when you do.
That's a good point.
They don't ask you to mow their lawn for them or spend extra time with them or get them a really personal gift for Christmas, but they feel special.
Nah, he's spitting.
When you do. I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it.
God calls us to.
Cheers.
I want to ask you guys, as people who have been kids for many years, children for your entire lives.
I am an experienced child.
How has honoring your parents blessed you?
Ooh, how has honoring my parents blessed you?
It has made me wiser.
Cheers.
It has made me wiser. I think, it's so much easier to see it as an adult than as a 16-year-old brat,
Yeah.
And I'll say 16-year-old brat in my own sense, not that every 16-year-old is a brat, but
Fair.
as an adult, I definitely see that rather honoring my mom is listening to the advice that she gives, right? As an adult, she's told me multiple times, you don't have to take my advice, but listen to my advice and consider my advice. And I think just listening to my mom and honoring her in that aspect, and even with my dad too, listening to them intently and, understanding that they're coming from a place that they love me, they want what's best for me, and understanding their position as a parent as to why they're telling me the things they're telling me. Okay, cool. Yeah, wow, okay, I didn't consider that perspective. Okay, I didn't consider that. A lot of times it's frustrating looking back now and my mom being like, yeah, it's not a good friend for you. And it's just like, Mom, what do you mean? Like, you're not there with me when we're having a great time. And
I don't know, Eric.
yeah, exactly. It's frustrating at that time, like hearing that as a kid. But as an adult, I look back, I'm like, man, like there's a lot of heartache and tension that's avoided if I had like, honored my parents. And I see that definitely as an adult, like being able to have a lot more, freedom and conversation with my parents, specifically my mom with relationships and whatnot. Like even like the whole dating process with Erica.
Yeah. I would even go beyond wise, and I would probably say safe, not in the sense of, well, actually, yeah, I'll just say safe, because I think with wisdom, right? You're like, maybe you like fight against that, but I think someone can learn either the easy way or the hard way. And I think in honoring your parents, maybe the easy way is looking at somebody else mess up, like your 16-year-old friend who goes, but Daddy, I love him, and then has his.
Just thought of a Childish Gambino song.
I was thinking of Little Mermaid, so that's where our brains are. But but like you're seeing the hurt, the pain, the mistakes, or whatever and the consequences of the mistakes that happen to a lot of other kids, and you're like, oh, wow, I'm glad Mom and Dad told me not to do that. Especially with like all the struggles that like I have while not being into drugs or like sleeping around with whoever, like growing up and stuff. I cannot imagine like the amount of like stuff I'd have to like deal with in my in my own
amplifies your problems.
Amplifies my problems to the nth degree, and like the Lord can redeem, and the Lord has, and the Lord continues to, for sure.
Ooh, come on.
But if you can avoid unnecessary pain and listen to your parents, and that's what I saw.
You saying that just made me think of it.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear someone say, "I'm just gonna learn the hard way," I'm just like, I just cringe a little bit. I'm like, man, if just off my own experience.
Yeah.
I feel like such an old head when I say that, going off my own experience. It's like, man, I wish you wouldn't. I really do.
Yeah. I think it's one of those classic, like, I think I appreciate the type of relationship we get to have with God when we grow up, because we can look at like younger kids or whoever, like either ourselves or even younger people who are like, I'm just going to learn the hard way. And I'm like, and you're like, buddy, I've learned the hard way.
If only.
It's not worth it,
Yeah.
And then, then you think about God looking at you like, it's like, hey, buddy, I know what the hard way looks like. Don't take the hard way. And so I think even having the humility to see your mistakes, the way you did not listen to your parents or honor your parents, or seeing the mistakes of others, or understanding why your parents said what they said after obeying them, it gives you the wisdom and keeps you the wisdom to both understand what not to do, but also understand, oh wow, there's a reason why God says to, I can't think of an example, do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit, or all that other stuff. And I think honoring your parents builds a trust not only between you and your parents, but also between you and God, that He has there's a reason that He says what He says, and we can still choose to learn the hard way if we want to, and just like disobeying Mom and Dad doesn't mean that we're all of a sudden kicked out of the house. Disobeying God doesn't mean that we're kicked out of the kingdom of heaven or anything, but we just make lives for ourselves harder. And I think that's, it's kind of what I hope for a lot of kids to kind of pick up on. But
there's this beautiful thing, and I think Frank alluded to it a couple times, where like when we learn obedience to our parents, even when things don't make sense, right? When we're just like, I don't see anything wrong with this kid, let me hang out with him. Like, you're being dramatic, like,
or irrational.
Like when you obey them, when you don't understand, how much more does it train you to obey when you don't understand your spiritual father and his will for your life, right? And the things that he would have for you. It grows your faith to trust something that says, hey, I don't understand why. This seems like a perfectly good option, but if my parents or in the future God is telling me, listen, man, this is not the right direction for you. I'm going to put you somewhere else that might be a little bit unknown, that might be scary for you. It might be just not what you want. It's a lot easier to listen in faith and say, hey, there's been a lot of times in my life where I had to shut up and listen, and it has blessed me so much because I've been able to trust in something that knows more than I do. So, why might honoring your father and mother be really important in today's culture?
I would say that I would equate it to the Israelites. A lot of the Levitical law that was given to them was for in demonstration, so people could look at them and say like, oh my gosh, you guys are different. Why are you different? I would say that in the same sense for Christians today, specifically to American culture, even more specifically to us. I'll just say Floridian culture. I'll just speak for our state.
Duval.
Yeah. It's, you know, the holiness and being set apart, I think, is drastically important. Just because I really hate to be that generation, you know what I mean? Like I feel like talking to you guys makes me feel real old right now, but I'm only 27, but I'm just gonna say, like, I feel like, you know, including me, but, you know, I remember probably like 2 or 3 years after I graduated high school, I was with my friends and ran into our old assistant principal, and he was like, man, these kids nowadays, like, they'll cuss anybody out. He was like, they'll because I went to public school. They'll cuss anybody out, you know.
Hey, me too, eventually.
Hey, yeah.
Eventually.
You didn't grow up in public school. But, like, you know, he'll be like, I think these kids nowadays, they'll cuss anybody out. They'll cuss you out. They'll cuss their parents out. He was just, like, very adamant. It was like, it just, you know, he's very understanding that, like, kids have emotions, but, you know, it's just this idea of, I can very much sense that there's a difference in someone by how they treat their parents, right? Like how they speak to their parents, how they take in their parents, how they speak of their parents too. You know, I think my mom, when I was in college, really convicted me. I was, you know, on the phone with her and just kind of expressing the frustrations about my complicated relationship with my dad. And, you know, she just kind of stopped me. She's like, hey, I love you. And I want you to know, you know, this is what the Bible says. The Bible says you need to honor your father. And speaking of him in this negative light is not very honoring to him. And it sucks because, like, I want to get mad, but, like, obviously, you know, when your mom, that feeling when, like, your mom's right, you don't want your mom to be right, and she's just right, and
like, you get mad, it's just like.
But I can imagine, you know, it speaks volumes when, you know, I have a complicated relationship with my father, and then someone else that has a complicated relationship with their father, if they see how I interact with my dad, even though we have a complicated relationship, that's a segue to the gospel right then and there, right? Like, hey, like, this is what God has done in my life, and this is the light that this is what God has called me to do. This is the commandment that he has for me, so that's what I think of.
Yeah, I think both as a witness and also as, I mean, you could answer 2 ways, as a witness or as that's just wisdom, you know? It's like, why shouldn't I walk into the wall? It's like, well, do you want people thinking you're an idiot, or do you just not want to get hit in the head? Those are 2 good reasons why not to run into the wall. I think, you know, to honor your parents in this day and age means that you are a witness to how Christians are different than the world around them, especially now since I think, you know, a lot of kids grew up in very restrictive households, and so they as parents now are keeping their house unrestricted. So it's like, you know what? I'm gonna let the kid do whatever, right? Like, I'm not trying to be how I grew up, where mom and dad didn't let me do anything, and they were overly strict, which maybe has some merit, but that results in a lot of freedom. And if you read in the book of Judges, you'll know that human beings having freedom, full freedom, is not a very good thing for humans. And so there is wisdom in obeying your parents, and you can come from a healthy place to say, hey, like, this is what happened when I obeyed my parents. So you, as a person who maybe went through all these things with your parents, like, you can know that if you parent in the way that is honoring to God, then you'll produce, like, kids who are, like, healthy and prayerfully godly. But you'll see.
Yeah, and even on the parent side, I think, right, it's just as important to, right, win the heart of your kids and make sure they respect and honor you, and that you're vulnerable and humble with them. I think, you know, especially in today's culture, it can be hard for people to see, but I think it is a ridiculously attractive thing to serve a good master.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect there. But when you have like a dad or a mom who care about you, who have your back, that are there to support you and cheer you on and help you, and because you have this good relationship that you developed through consistent honor, that's just, I feel like, universally something to be envied for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's just something that's like, hey, how do you have, right, a moment for testimony? How do you have a good relationship with your father after he's persecuted you for years for being a Christian? It's like, God has done an incredible thing. And it is only by his grace that we have a working relationship right now.
Yeah.
Truly.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in to our podcast without a name. This is our pilot, first episode. Maybe we'll get renewed for another season.
We'll see.
I'm your co-hosts, Nick. These are my co-hosts.
Christian.
Josiah.
Sonny.